Well, joining me now from Washington is Neela Ghoshal. She is a senior researcher in LGBT rights at Human Rights Watch. From Tunis, Munir Baatour. He is the lawyer and president of LGBT rights groups Shams in Tunisia. And with me on the set is the manager of TRT World Research Centre, Tarek Cherkaoui. He is also a specialist on North Africa. Thanks all so much for joining us. Neela, let me begin with you in Washington. First, tell us more about this case that has brought so much attention to this issue now in Tunisia. What happened to this man who claims he was raped and then was re-victimized by Tunisian law enforcement and the state itself?
Well, unfortunately, this case in Tunisia is not unique. It's gotten a lot of recent attention, which I think is important. But I also want to highlight that we've documented many cases like this over the years, in which people who have been victims of rape or victims of other types of assault, or who simply have been going about their lives, have been arrested by Tunisian police and then have been taken and subjected to forced anal examinations to try to prove whether or not they are gay. Now, this particular case was a young man, a 22-year-old man, known as AF, and he was assaulted by several men who he'd met through social media. When he went and filed a complaint with the police, that's exactly what happened. They assumed that he'd had consensual sex. Whether he did or not, we don't know. But in either case, it's a tremendous injustice that what happened to him next was that he was arrested and that he was taken and subjected to a forced anal examination, which involves doctors physically penetrating him in an extremely invasive and humiliating way, using a test that was invented in the 1800s that has no scientific basis to try to prove that he was someone who regularly had homosexual sex. This is a huge injustice, and unfortunately it happens to Tunisians on a monthly or even weekly basis.
And Munir Baatour, through your experience as a Tunisian, representing gay rights in the country, you've seen these cases, I imagine, all too many times before. Tell us what is wrong with Tunisian law that allows this to continue happening.
The Tunisian law doesn't respect the human rights and especially the LGBT rights. The 230 article of Penal Code condemn homosexuality to up to 3 years of jail. It's discrimination against gays and lesbians in Tunisia. But I have to tell you, this law is from French colonialism in 1913. More than 100 years this law was adopted. And this law is against a new constitution of Tunisia who guarantees the no discrimination between citizens.
Okay. Tarek, I mean, we've heard this before, this argument that the law is actually against the constitution of Tunisia. How is this? How does it, again, I'll ask you as well, how does it continue to happen? And how is it that the law enforcement is actually allowed to break Tunisian law, to contravene the Constitution, and continue to unlawfully actually persecute these cases?
Well, I think, if we take the helicopter view and we zoom back a little bit into like 2001, what happened in Tunisia basically is there's a lot of hope. There was a lot of attempts and people expected a lot from the Tunisian experiment. However, people are now more or less disappointed by the many disappointments, the many regressions, the many U-turns that took place. And one of them is the fact that the deep state is still there. The deep state is not letting the revolution fruits bear its fruits, and they are fighting back.
The deep state, you're going to have to explain.
Yes. So Basically, what happened was at the height of the revolution, there was a movement in the street. There was a lot of associations. There was a lot of calls for freedom of expression. This took place in the initial year. Later on, it became more clear that the deep state, with all the major key players in Tunisia, are still there, except like a very few players at the very top. And this led to a lot of regression slowly. The closest that I can explain is the quote by Ernest Hemingway: "How did you go bankrupt?" He said 2 ways: gradually, then suddenly. And this is what's happening, unfortunately, in Tunisia right now.
Okay. Neela, let me ask you, I mean, we heard Tarek's explanation. And as well, Munir was citing these laws that date back to 1913, some of them from the French colonial period. Tell us then why these laws haven't actually been amended. And let's be honest here, do Tunisian lawmakers in power right now, and does the Tunisian public want these laws amended? Do they want to protect the rights of the LGBTQ community in Tunisia?
Well, I think there's a couple different ways to look at this question. Tunisia has responsibilities to uphold international human rights standards, and that includes respecting the right to privacy, the right to non-discrimination, the right to equality, the right to access to justice. These are all part of international covenants that Tunisia has signed and is bound by, as well as its own constitution that protects essentially the same rights. The right to be free from torture. Anal exams constitute a form of torture. And so Tunisia is obligated to protect these rights, whether or not the majority of Tunisian politicians or Tunisian citizens are in support of human rights of LGBT people. Now, I think we are seeing some progress in the political class. We saw that the president established a commission, a presidential commission on individual liberties last year, and asked this commission to make recommendations with regard to legal reform to protect people's fundamental rights, including the right to privacy. And among the commission's recommendations, which also addressed women's rights, for example, other recommendations were to repeal Article 230 and to ban the practice of forced anal exams. So that came from a government body. So that is a step forward. Unfortunately, the president has been non-responsive so far, and there has been no further progress toward implementing those recommendations. But it's something that Tunisia is obligated to do. Now, politicians need to lead, and the public often follows. And if we see politicians adapting their views and their policies toward LGBT people, we will see flourishing of LGBT expression in Tunisia, and we'll see space created whereby ordinary citizens can come to understand what it means to be gay or lesbian or bisexual or trans. And eventually, I believe that views among the ordinary people in Tunisia will change as well. That's what we've seen around the world when there is legal progress on repealing this kind of regressive law.
Okay. Munir, again, you are in Tunisia.
Yes.
And as you know, politicians often do what they think voters actually want. So speak to us about the Tunisian public's mindset. Do they want these laws and these attitudes to change and to protect gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans people?
There is different opinions in Tunisia about that. The Islamists are against changing this law, but there is other person, the intellectual and men and women of culture are in favor of changing this law. But changing the law needs political volunteer, political will. Actually, in the parliament in Tunisia, there is no volunteer to change this law. Actually, there is a project of law to ban anal examination only, but they will maintain the 230 article of penal code that penalize or criminalizing homosexuality. I think we need foreign pressure and big support from European Union and from UN to make pressure against Tunisian government to change this law and to stop putting homosexual in jail.
Right. Tarek, let me bring it back to you. I mean, we can't deny that this is also a problem throughout the world, really, but it is a problem in the Arab world, some say in particular. How hopeful are you that Tunisia, because it has been a maverick of sorts in the Arab world, that it can provide the progressive leadership that's needed to change attitudes in the Arab world toward lesbian and gay communities? Do you think Tunisia might be the country that can do that?
Unfortunately, I would be a little bit pessimistic here to say that given what we have seen in the past 3-4 years, there is no real room for optimism. I would say that there are multiple pressures on both internal and external. For example, the Saudis, the UAE are pumping a lot of money into the political sphere to prevent any change from happening in Tunisia, any real change, and they are actually reinforcing any kind of conservative, not in the sense of religious conservative, but politically conservative forces in order to crush any kind of change. And you have also internal forces who use the deep state, like I mentioned before, who use this kind of rhetoric, whether, in the case that you mentioned, but there are also other cases. For example, there was this case whereby a whole school, a whole Quranic school was taken for anal examination because there was an allegation which was even not proven, not corroborated. So the whole school went to the police station without informing the parents. These were like very young people. They were there to learn Quran. Suddenly they found themselves in a police station being examined for something that maybe they don't even understand why they are doing that. So these kind of practices make me very, very pessimistic about the future of Tunisia.
Neela, I'm wondering if you share those views or if you're more optimistic for Tunisia on this front.
Well, I tend to be a little bit more optimistic just because I think we have seen such a wave of change around the world, with at least 7 countries in the last few years getting rid of their anti-sodomy laws. Now, that's not so much in the Middle East and North Africa, but it is happening in sub-Saharan Africa. It's happening in Asia. We saw a huge court victory in India, striking down India's sodomy law. There's a case coming up in Kenya for a ruling this Friday, whereby Kenya might decriminalize same-sex conduct as well. So I think ultimately, I don't believe that the Middle East and North Africa will lag behind entirely in this global change, but it's going to take time. And what gives me a little bit of hope in Tunisia is that I have seen the strength of the activists. Groups like Shams that Munir represents, groups like Damj, Mawjudeen are doing tremendous work in Tunisia. And these are the change makers. They are going to push, and they're not going to let up. And ultimately, their arguments are going to prevail because their arguments are much stronger in support of freedom, liberation, privacy, than the arguments of those who would like to keep the state in everybody's bedroom. I think at the end of the day, we'll see change, but I don't think it's going to be a quick or easy path.
Munir, let me ask you, do you feel safe doing your work in Tunisia?
I am, yes, I'm feeling safe, but in our organization, we receive often a lot of threats and a lot of persons are against us. We are fighting for our rights as LGBT community in Tunisia. We have the freedom of expression since revolution, but since the revolution there is more than 500 homosexual arrested, more than 27 homophobic murder. When homosexual is victim of rapes or robbed, he can't go to police to complain because he's afraid to be convinced for his homosexuality. It's a hard situation. Our situation is very bad in Tunisia, and we hope the parliament will change this law quickly, because the number of victims of rapes and robberies is very important, and homosexual does not have the right to access to the justice in Tunisia.
Right. Munir Baatour, I will have to give you the last word. Unfortunately, we are completely out of time for this segment. I thank all three of you so much for joining us.
Thank you.